Now, another feature of Angular I want to show you is this concept of a template reference variable. So what does this mean? It essentially allows us to grab a hold of an element or a component and then access some further information about it. The easiest way to demonstrate this is by simply showing you. To create a template reference variable, or essentially give us access to a piece of a template. So for example, we could take our input, we can say hash. Now this is going to be our message input, and you can call this anything that you like, but adding this hash essentially gives us a variable that we can then access throughout our template, which we can then pluck pieces of information from. So for example, if we take our message input and down below we'll create a quick p tag, inside of here we can then interpolate our value. So we can say message input. Now if we hit save, this is going to stringify our reference. So because we are essentially exporting, and I like to think of this word export, we're exporting a reference to our element, we do in fact get the entire element. Now Angular is converting this to a string because it cannot print out an input in the DOM as we are trying to. However, because it's exported, we can then start to access the properties on it, such as value. So when we save this out, we can then see hello world. We can then start typing, and our handle input is updating our new message as we would expect above in our h1 tag. However, we're not actually referencing that new message property here. We're referencing the message inputs.value property. So what this means is we could use a more simplistic approach if we wanted to grab that value and then set it. So instead of having a callback, and this is not necessarily something I would suggest doing, I'm simply demonstrating to you this idea and the concept of a template reference variable. It's a way for us to then access anything we like throughout our components template. And albeit a simple use case, template reference variables do have more advanced use cases, which we will come on to as we continue through the Angular courses. So instead of having this handle input, what we're going to do is just completely delete it, which means below we can also delete our handle input. That means that we can clean up our type definitions. We don't need to worry too much about that. So we can now say new message is then going to be the result of our message input.value. Now this is an easy way for us to set the value inside of our template. And if we hit save and we can then start typing, you can see that this is doing all the work for us. We're taking that input event, we're then reassigning the message input value to our new message. So we're not dealing with that $event anymore, and our component is far cleaner. We could of course remove our handle click as well, but we'll leave it in for good measure. So essentially using a template reference variable differs based on where you want to use it. Here we are using a template reference variable on an input, so it's an element. You can see that we have HTML input element. We're going to get a raw DOM element back. If we were to use it on a directive or a component, which we'll come on to in later chapters and courses, we may then get something different back. And there are various decorators and APIs in the much more advanced sections of the Angular courses here that we'll uncover as we continue. But this is a great place for us to get started. So this has been an interesting feature for us to uncover in Angular. You can of course use a template reference variable elsewhere. So we could add hash and then heading, and we could then reference our heading, and we could talk to an inner text property, which then gives us, as we then start typing, that reflected change. So there's lots of different ways that we can mix and match our approaches. What I'm doing in this chapter is just giving you lots of different tools so you can decide on how to accomplish certain tasks depending on what you are building and the functionality at hand. So that's it for this lesson. Template reference variables are very helpful for us. We can declare them simply once, and we can then reference them throughout our components template. We can have message input, for example, which is then exported. We can also access the value inside the component body. So if we were to perform a more complex task, such as not just setting this input.value, and we wanted to perhaps intercept it and do something inside a callback, because we can only perform very basic assignments such as this inside of our event callback, and ideally we wouldn't really do this in a real world scenario, but it shows you the power of the Angular templating system. We could then pass in a function, again, such as our handle input, and then we can grab a reference in our JavaScript code. Now, this involves using more complex features of Angular. So this isn't something that we're going to cover throughout this course, and we're going to save it for the more advanced Angular course, as it ties in with a lot of the lifecycle hooks and more complex component communication and functionality. So that's it for this lesson. Let's jump into the next one.